Hey guys, this is John. I want to share with you a game I played recently in the Pro Chess League. The Pro Chess League is a team league. Teams from all over the world compete online on 4 boards. So you create a lineup, boards 1 through 4. The average rating cannot exceed 2,500 FIDE. This league attracts some of the best players in the world, and I play for the Minnesota Blizzard, our local team here. Thanks to all of you who have supported us. I know there's a lot of you guys out there. Now, the regular season for the 2019 Pro Chess League just wrapped up, and the final thing in the season was a Battle Royale, which was basically a 7-round 10+2 Blitz event where all of the boards in our division, we're in the Pacific Division, played each other. So all the board 1s played each other, all the board 2s, etc. I played on board 4 for our team, and I played all the other board 4s in the division. And I was the highest rated in the division, but there were some very difficult players. And without further ado, let's get into this game. I had the white pieces. This is the second game of the Battle Royale, and I was playing National Master Vinesh Ravuri of the San Jose Hackers. His FIDE rating is 2116. His USCF, US Chess Federation rating is 2277, so he's a National Master by USCF ratings. And I opened with d4. Remember, this is a 10+2 game. My opponent responded knight f6, and I played knight f3. This is a move I play every once in a while. It's a flexible move. It rules out some aggressive attempts by black, stuff like the Budapest Gambit, if you're afraid of playing against the Budapest Gambit for some reason. I often play it just for flexibility reasons, and also if I want to keep the c-pawn back, I have the option of going into a London system or a Torre, which you will see I play in this game. So my opponent played g6, and I played bishop g5. And by the way, I didn't do any preparation for this individual game. I didn't do any specific preparation for any of the games in this Battle Royale. The games are very fast. People tend to avoid their normal openings anyways, or at least I think it wouldn't be a good use of time to try to predict what openings your opponents are going to play in these. So I also had a very busy day leading up to this, so I just came in with a clear head and played some of my normal stuff. So the Torre Attack is a line that I've played extensively from the white side over the past, I'd say, 1 to 2 years. And I like the kind of positions that you get. My opponent played bishop g7 here, and I played knight bd2. So by refusing to commit the c-pawn, you keep open the option of playing c3, which works especially well against this bishop on g7, creating a potential wall of pawns against that fianchettoed bishop. And also, I haven't committed the e-pawn as well, so I can put the pawn on e3, or if I want to get ambitious and play e4 with the help of the knight here, I have that option too. So my opponent castled, and I decided to play it in standard Torre Attack fashion, just pawn to e3. Again, e4 would be more ambitious, although I kind of think if white's going to adopt that setup, it might be better to have the knight on c3, sort of the conventional position for the knight. But e3, my opponent played d6, and now I played bishop d3. And here already, there's just a lot of options at white's disposal. Bishop e2 and bishop c4 are moves that I played before. Bishop c4 is actually the move I preferred the most in the past, and there's a nice trap here, which I'm still waiting for someone to fall for, but I can't get anyone to fall for it, and it goes c5 if black's going to try to chip away at the center. That move makes a lot of sense. c3. And now if black looks to fianchetto this light square bishop, see if you can find the response for white, if you want to pause your video. White to move and win. So white can win material by playing bishop takes f6, sort of an unprompted looking exchange of the bishop for the knight. And the point being that you have bishop d5 as a follow-up, and that rook on a8 is going to be embarrassed. Black's going to have to shed a piece here. And actually a grandmaster has fallen for this in the past, if you search the database. So bishop c4, active move. There is some point to putting the bishop here. Black can play d5 if they want. Just another option here. And again, bishop e2 as well, if white wants to keep the bishop a little bit further back. Bishop e2 has the value in if black plays e5, for example, against the bishop on d3, as you'll see in this game, then white doesn't have to worry about e4 as much. But I put the bishop on the conventional square. My opponent played knight c6. I castled, and then he played e5. And I played c3, just fortifying the center. And my opponent played rook e8. And it is possible for black to play something like bishop e6, let's say. I saw one game in the database just developing the bishop. Probably bishop g4 doesn't make as much sense here if black's looking to get the bishop in the game a little bit more aggressively, because I think after h3, usually if you fianchetto on one side of the board, that doesn't combine well with developing your bishop to the same side of the board with a pin, because if black tries to keep the pin, bishop h5, they run into g4, and that bishop is out of luck. There's no g6 square to drop back to. So I did find one game in the database as I was doing the analysis of this game, bishop e6, but it probably doesn't even stand so favorably here because of e4, and white can try to threaten d5, forking the two minors. So I think what my opponent did, rook e8, makes a lot of sense. And here I played queen c2. For the moment, e4 is not a threat. If black played it now, I could just take. This knight is even pinned, but even if it wasn't, I have enough defenders of the e4 point. So now my opponent played d5, which I think is actually a pretty good move. It seems to waste a tempo with the d-pawn, moving it again, but it makes sense, gaining center space, and now for sure creating the threat of e4. Also possible to play h6 if black wanted to ask the question of my bishop, what it's planning to do there. But d5 was played. And now here I captured on e5, but I'm actually not sure this is the best move. In hindsight, I think I prefer this move, bishop b5, pinning the knight, which may allow this knight to come to e5 very soon. So just as an example, if black attacks my knight, e4, knight e5, bishop d7, since if knight takes e5, I win the exchange, bishop takes e8, so bishop d7. Now I can capture on c6, taking with the bishop, so I can keep this strong knight here, and say black takes with the b-pawn. Now I like this move, knight b3, suggestion from the engine, and I really like the grip that white is developing here if that knight comes to c5. Also f3 may be a nice option to try to pry open the f-file and maybe get an attack going against f6. This seems promising. So I kind of like the potential white may have with bishop b5 over what I did. But I took on e5. My opponent captured. We had a trade of the knights, and I played knight f3. These moves were all played fairly quickly. My opponent was playing fast. I was playing a little bit slower, but nothing too crazy yet. So knight f3, I'm hitting the rook, and I'm also defending the bishop in the process. My opponent retreated to e8, which makes sense. And now I was looking at my pawn structure, and I played similar pawn structures out of the Torre Attack, and at some point you do need to enlist the help of the c and e pawns often to get an advantage or fight for the initiative. So I played c4, just looking to attack this pawn on d5, apply a little bit more pressure. Because if I play something standard here, a rook coming to d1, let's say, I don't feel like I'm going to pose too many questions to black in the center of the board, especially if black plays c6 and develops their bishop soon, bishop to e6, or maybe even bishop g4. I think the only other move that may make sense here is a prophylactic move, playing h3, specifically to stop black from playing bishop g4. But c4 makes a good deal of sense too. And now my opponent played bishop g4, but I feel like this is a slight mistake already. Might be more flexible just to play c6, just prop up that center pawn. After c6, I can try to play what I did in the game, which is bringing a rook over, but I feel like black's going to retain more options, as we shall see. But my opponent preferred bishop g4, and I wasn't crazy about allowing this. That just seemed like an unnecessary weakening on my structure. So I played knight d4 here, jumping the knight into the center. And now this bishop, even though it is controlling d1, it's otherwise sort of floating out on the g4 square. My opponent now played c6, and here I played h3, trying to gain a tempo on that bishop. And now pretty quickly he dropped the bishop back to c8, which surprised me a bit because it's an undeveloping move, bring the bishop back to its original square. I can see why he did that. Maybe he wasn't thrilled with the other options for the bishop. Remember, bishop h5 is always going to run into g4. Nowhere for that bishop to go. F5, the f5 square is covered multiple times by my pieces, so you can't go there. Bishop e6 may be the best move, pretty solid. I'm guessing he just didn't want to give me the option of taking the bishop and grabbing the two bishops. Bishop d7, also another solid move, but It does give me the option of taking on d5 and saddling him with an isolated pawn. Maybe start trying to hammer his weaknesses somehow. But still, bishop c8 feels wrong to me, and I was starting to feel pretty good about my position, actually. So I played rook fd1. This is something I've mentioned time and time again in my videos. If you can line up one of your rooks with your opponent's queen, even if there are multiple pieces and pawns in the way, it often pays dividends later. Just tactically down the line, when things open up, when those exchanges are made, you may be thanking yourself for having invested that single tempo to do that. So rook fd1, I like this move. And why did I use the f rook as opposed to the a rook, you might wonder? That's often a dilemma in these positions. Well, when you're debating about which rook to send to a square, you should really consider what the other rook, the rook that you're not moving, is going to be doing. Are there open files or a potential use for that rook on one of the other files? And I thought here, if I play rook ad1, then I would in essence be saying that this f rook is going to be useful on the f file or the e file, neither of which seemed likely to me because these pawns are blocked and not exactly able to advance effectively in open lines. What does seem slightly more likely, though, is that this rook could come to the c file. Because there's tension here, if that tension ever gets resolved, maybe I could play down the c file. So that's why I chose rook fd1 over rook ac1. And now my opponent again plays a questionable move. He played h6, which maybe before, like way back in the opening, before there were trades in the center, this would have made more sense. But I think here is just unnecessarily weakening. As it stands, I have this queen-bishop battery aiming at my opponent's kingside, and he has two nice pawns connected, much like I was describing in the opening with white having the pawns on d4, c3, b2 against this bishop on g7. Black sort of has a mini blockade against my bishop in the same way. So by playing h6, we want to take a look at that g6 pawn. That g6 pawn has become more tender than it was just a move ago. So I just played bishop h4. I keep the pin. Didn't see any reason to do this. I thought briefly about bishop f4, but the pin definitely seemed annoying. I could tell black was not too comfortable with the pin on the knight and also the potential pressure down the file here. So he now played queen to b6, trying to escape both of those things. Other options for black, bishop e6, if he wants to just bring the bishop out and be solid. Psychologically, it's hard to play a move like bishop e6 because he took the time to play bishop c8 and undevelop earlier. The computer recommends d takes c4, but that seems like, again, a very difficult move to play psychologically, seemingly doing the work for me here. Oh, I'm sorry, actually. I think the engine recommended d takes c4 back a couple moves. Yeah, I should make this point because this is an important distinction. At this moment, d takes c4 was much more appropriate because, let's say I take with a bishop, threatening discoveries down the file and maybe attacking f7. Here, black can play queen a5 and hit the bishop on g5. Very important difference, and black hasn't played that weakening h6 move. If we compare it to what happened in the game, so black playing h6, which is a good example of how one pawn move can change the course of a game. So now if black plays d takes c4, I take with the bishop, threatening discoveries on the queen, queen a5. Maybe you can discern the difference yourself if you want to pause your video. But white can play queen takes g6. There's no bishop on g5 to worry about. Queen takes g6, taking advantage of the absence of the pawn on h7, ganging up on f7. Bishop takes f6 is also a threat. Black's losing here. So you can see how the dominoes start to potentially fall and affect the position here and the level of comfort black has, especially with their pawn structure and their queen. So queen b6 was played instead. And here I spent some time. I had my longest think of the game on this next move. And I believe I wrote down how much time I spent. I think I spent a little over 2 minutes, which is a long time in a 10-minute game. 10 minutes, 2-second increment only. But I sensed that this was a critical moment, and I also saw that I had a chance here. So again, if you want to pause your video and try to figure out how I should proceed, you can do that now. Okay, so two good options in this position. I can play bishop takes f6, or I can play bishop takes g6. Both moves are good for white. I went for bishop takes f6, and the idea with both of these is similar. So after black captures, now bishop takes g6, and this all comes back to black pushing that pawn to h6 and weakening his kingside, but especially with the queen no longer guarding the rook. If black takes this bishop, then after queen takes g6, I have the check on the king and the attack on the dark square bishop and the rook. I'm going to be winning something, winning back all my material with interest. So king f8, queen takes f6, and if black blocks with the bishop, queen takes e8. So that's the crux of the idea. Now, I saw that pretty fast here, but I was, for one thing, debating between the difference, whether it's stronger to play bishop takes g6 or bishop takes f6 first. I actually think they're pretty close in value. The reason I went with bishop takes f6 is it seemed a bit more clear. With bishop takes g6, if black takes, it works the same. Take, and this could transpose. But I thought it wasn't necessary to give black other options, such as knight e4, trying to break the coordination between the queen and the light square bishop, opening the dark square bishop. White's still significantly better here, but I just thought it made sense to rule that out. And the other reason I spent a lot of time a move ago deciding on bishop takes f6 was I saw black's strongest reply here, which he did indeed play. So if he takes, no big deal. Also, if he takes on c4, just one small thing I notice is I have the option of taking with the queen, and again, pinning black here, so the bishop is immune from capture. But the strongest reply for black is c5, trying to attack another piece and disturb my coordination. And now here I spent a minute 30 on my next move. This is move 20, but I think I should have played it faster because to me, in analysis now and during the game, it just seemed like the thematic move. And even though I am attacking and this game seems to be going in my direction for now, there's always things to improve on. And I think I could have played this next move faster. So spent a minute and 30 and played knight to b5. And the main reason I played this is to avoid coordination problems and also stop black from being able to capture on b2. So there's a lot to take in here. There's other options for white too. Bishop h7 check comes to mind. I thought about that briefly just to ensure that the bishop is not captured on the next move. So if black plays king g7, let's say, I could move the knight. It's a little bit tricky to find a square for the knight though, because if I just move it back to f3 or something, black has queen takes b2 or maybe even a capture here, getting the pawn back with a messy position where black may not be worse. But I can play knight f5. I don't think I saw this line in the game. Check. And if bishop takes f5, black takes here, I can play knight d6 check, discovery on the king and also threatening the rook. So if black takes on f5, I take with the bishop, and this seems to be significantly better for white. b2 is still hanging, and I think I categorically ruled out this line as because of that, but if black plays queen takes b2, let's say, this endgame looks very promising for white with all of these points being under attack, although it is opposite color bishops. So that may be a decent option. I didn't like knight b3 here because by virtue of black playing c5, the main thing that black opens up, other than attacking my knight on d4, is that black may be able to take this bishop on g6. Because after queen takes, note that the queen from b6 is holding the bishop laterally. So black can play king f8 at this point, defending the rook. And this is much less clear, as you'll see, than the game is with my knight on b3. So I sent the knight into the fray here, knight b5, blocking queen takes b2. And a similar position was reached. Black played f takes g6. I thought a6 at the time might be more challenging. Again, trying to chase the knight and just look to take advantage of my potential lack of coordination here. But white has a few different good options. One is to play knight c3. I think I could also play check here and then knight c3 if I really want to save the bishop, but knight c3 is more dynamic. And bishop takes c3. If black plays this instead, I can take here, king f8, and now knight takes d5, hits both the queen and the bishop. This is very good for white, just winning. So bishop takes c3, probably the best attempt. And now throw in this move. Bishop h7 check, king g7, take here. Black can take on c4, and white should be better after this. Rook b1 coming. Black's a little underdeveloped, weak king. But this would require some technique for sure to try to win this. So it seemed to me that that was a better attempt by Black, a6. But my opponent took on g6, and I recaptured with the queen. Black has to defend the rook. And now here, I just played rook takes d5. And at this point, I have 2 minutes and 24 seconds left, and my opponent has quite a bit of time, 7 minutes and 35 seconds left. He's been playing very quick. I actually played this opponent in another Battle Royale a little earlier in this season, and I won that game, and he was playing very quickly in that one as well. So he seems, I don't know a whole lot about him, but he seems like the type of player who enjoys putting pressure on his opponent on the clock, trying to induce them into making mistakes. So I knew I had a very promising attack at this moment after rook takes d5. If we count the material, I have 3 pawns for the piece. This pawn is hanging. I didn't want to take it right away because Black can play bishop g7 and look for a queen trade. Usually in these situations, it's better to play for the initiative and try to bring in further pieces into the attack than go for a pawn that kind of slows down the action. So I liked rook takes d5 because it helps coordinate my position. I'm threatening rook d6, which is going to interfere with the queen defending the bishop, attacking both of them. Also, knight d6 could be freed up if I want to attack the rook and threaten mate on f7. But I think this is a critical position. That's why I was noting the time. 2:24 for me, 7:35 for my opponent, because yes, white has an extremely strong, probably just decisive attack here. But if Black plays a tricky move, possibly one of 2 tricky moves here, who knows what could happen. So he thought for 40 seconds on this move, and he played bishop g7. Couple alternatives. So bishop takes b2 was one move. I think the main move I considered in the lead up to this, because that offers a queen trade and attacks my rook, so it seems pretty strong. I did see that I could play knight d6 here. That was probably going to be the move I was going to play. Interfering with the queen trade option, threatening the rook, also very important, threatening queen f7 mate. And if Black plays rook e7, trying to address that threat, rook b1, and I think white should be winning here. It's still a little bit messy, but this pin, the threat of queen takes h6, Black's completely exposed king, should be winning for white. I feel pretty good about this line. But a move that maybe could have given me trouble from a practical point of view is bishop e5. So another bishop move, offering the same queen trade and guarding h6, but crucially controlling this d6 square. Better controlling the d6 square, let's say. And still I should play knight d6, trying to threaten those same things. And now bishop e6, developing the bishop, guarding f7, also allowing the rook to assist in the defense on this rook here. And this does stop Black from defending the bishop with the rook, but if I take here, Black can take here. This is not clear. So the engine says rook ad1 is strongest at this point, but to find rook ad1 just seemingly allowing Black to take and maintaining the threats, even though this was +5 or something according to Stockfish, that would have put me under a great deal of pressure in the game, and I have no clue what I would have done here. So I just mentioned that because critical point in the game, yes, the game seems to be trending in white's favor with the attack, but I think this was a super important moment, and with something other than bishop g7 or bishop takes b2, especially this bishop e5 move, I think Black stands a good chance of confusing the issue here and maybe mounting a comeback. Note that I don't have a really good check after this move too, by the way, because these squares are covered. I can't take the pawn, as I already described. Black's queen defends. So I'm kind of forced to go for something like knight d6 and play for the attack, but Black has resources too with the 2 bishops. Instead, though, bishop g7, and now I played rook d6. Which, again, if the bishop was standing here, I would probably not be able to play. But rook d6. Thought briefly about knight d6, but rook e7 did not look clear at all to me. Rook d6, on the other hand, I saw I was going to gain a tempo on the queen, and that queen doesn't have a lot of options. Queen a5. Note that if Black tries to play rook e6, looking to attack my queen, just a very simple option is rook takes b6, rook takes g6, rook takes g6, and I've just up a ton of material here. Exchange plus 3 pawns. Again, comparing lines, which is something you guys should get used to doing. When you're analyzing lines, try to synthesize and make your lines more efficient by making mini conclusions. In that bishop takes b2 line, knight d6 is stronger here, as I was describing, because if rook d6, rook e6 is actually a legitimate defense in this position. I think even here the engine says white's better, but it's not it's not a comforting large advantage. And it's because in this variation, if takes, well, I sound like Hikaru, takes, then black can take the rook on a1 at the end versus having a bishop just standing uselessly on g7 with a white pawn on b2. Same variation, just slightly different setup. And this would be a lot less clear. I mean, I guess white still has some pawns, but black has the 2 bishops. Total messiness. White might not even be better here. So, yeah, tactical positions, got to compare variations, positions where things are looking desperate for you, got to look for chances, try to find a subtle difference between a line to help you get back in the game. So bishop g7, and now I like this rook d6 move as I played. Forces the queen to go to a5. And now this was another important moment. I saw an idea I had here which at minimum forces a draw, and if I had played it, I'm sure I would have gone for more. It's this idea of rook f6 check, trying to drive the king away from defending the rook, which would compel black to take. And now I have black under my thumb. I can force a perpetual. But realistically, like, let's think about a scenario like this. To win this, what is white probably going to have to do? I mean, white has to get another piece in the attack here. The queen alone against the black king is not going to be working. Maybe I could try to jump the knight into d6, but what's the one piece I haven't used at all in this game? It's the rook on a1. And often when you're attacking, there may come a moment where you need to just include another piece. Include another piece, often good to do so at a moment where you feel you have good control but no decisive blow. That may be the time to call up one more resource to make your attack that much stronger. So that's why I played rook ad1 in this position. I saw that black's queen was pretty well contained. I mean, we're controlling lots of these squares, so there's no aggressive queen moves. I saw that black's bishop, which did develop earlier, but then came back, doesn't have a good square to go to. These are all covered multiple times. This rook is out of the game. This bishop basically can't move. So it seemed like a very, very good moment to do this. And now black played a6. Not much to do at this point for black, as I was just saying. So a6 looking to drive away the knight. And now I went ahead with rook f6. Give the check. Black has to take. This is just easily winning for white, so no issues there. So bishop takes f6, took with the queen. And here I gave a couple checks just to pick up that pawn on h6 with check. Black went king g8. If king f7, I can play knight d6 check, and this is going to bring things to a swift conclusion with the inclusion of that knight. Just as an example, let's say king e7, queen check. And if black tries to step to d8, there's knight takes b7, double check and mate. Coming up to e6, it's just going to be mate in a matter of moves here. You can almost pick your mate you want to deliver. So black did not step there. Also, if king e7, very similar. I can give a check on g7, king e6, check. Black's king's just way too exposed. So black instead went to g8. I gave one more check here. Black played king f8. Again, king f7, knight d6 is very nice for white. I gave one more check. King g8. And now I lifted my rook. Rook d5. So the purpose of those checks was just to get in position so that when I lift my rook, I can aim for the g7 square, or possibly easily get a column checkmate with my major pieces controlling the G file and the H file. So yeah, I went over that kind of fast. Like, I could try to lift the rook in this position, but it makes a little more sense to get closer and then lift it. So the threat here is rook G5 check, king H7, queen G7 mate, and just simply ask black how they're going to defend against that threat. And at this point, black resigned. This is move 31. The final clock times were 43 seconds for me, so I was getting down there. with the 2-second increment, but pretty far down there. And black having 6 minutes and 33 seconds. So a lot of time left for black. In playing rook d5, of course, I had to make sure that queen e1 check wasn't going to hurt me. I'm patting myself on the back for playing h3 way back when. So queen e1 check, I can just play king h2, and black's faced with these same threats. I'm even controlling this pawn for good measure, but yeah, no real good solution to rook g5. Only stuff black can do to delay the inevitable here, like rook e7 or something. Also note if black plays king h7, trying to ensure that rook g5 doesn't come with check, then I just swing over to h5 and deliver a mate like this. So I thought this was an instructive attacking game. Not a perfect game. I think there were a few things I could have done differently as far as time management, for sure. I was happy with the quality of my moves overall, even though I didn't feel like I had an advantage out of the opening. If you're playing this line, you're not usually strictly playing it for an advantage. I think this is an ideal rapid line for white, Torre Attack. Getting a position I'm comfortable with, being able to play moves relatively quickly. It does lead to some interesting positions, but I'm not going to sit here and say that white gets a strict advantage in this line. Yeah, I'm just trying to work on my time management in particular, and I think there's a few things I could have done differently. From black's point of view, I think this is roundabout where black starts to go astray, like bishop g4, bishop c8 undeveloping, and then especially this h6 move. If I were to point to one move that really set the tone for the rest of the game, it's this h6 move. And black had a lot of issues to work out around their king. But even then, you know, be on the lookout for resources and ways to confuse the position. I think if black would have used a little more time here, he maybe could have come up with a move like bishop e5 to potentially confuse the issue. And I've seen players blow positions that are much more winning than this for white. So even though if you add this on Stockfish, it'll say white's dead winning here. From a practical point of view, not easy at all, especially in a 10+2 blitz game. So I hope you enjoyed this game analysis. Tomorrow, Tuesday, March 19th, the Minnesota Blizzard will be playing our first playoff match. We play against the Australia Kangaroos. I am not in the lineup, but I will be doing commentary on my Twitch channel, which I'll link in the description below. The match starts at 7:20 p.m. U.S. Central Time. Hope you guys can make it. Again, thank you so much for your support if you've been supporting the Blizzard this season. And if not, you know who to support going forward. Like I said, I'll be doing commentary. Hope we can advance. We have, I believe, Grandmaster Fidel Corrales, Grandmaster Andrew Tang, Penguin GM1, International Master Thomas Beardsden from the Netherlands, who's been an awesome pickup for us this season, and Grandmaster Nikola Mitkov playing for our squad. So it'll be a fun one. All right, let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be back again soon with another video. Bye, guys.